Testing 1, 2, check 1, 2. Testing mics 1, 2, 3, 4, test 1, 2. The white button. Test 1, 2, check 1, 2, test 1, 2. Testing 1, 2, check 1, 2.
Good evening. Good evening. I apologize for running a few minutes late. I was meeting with our search firm. The board is going to go into executive session after this meeting to discuss the superintendent search with the search firm. And they were just giving me a preliminary overview of what that agenda was going to look like tonight. So again, I apologize for being a few minutes late. Today is March the 19th, 2020, and the business before us today is the superintendent's budget presentation. There are no speakers, is that correct, Madam Clerk? All right. So we're going to begin with the presentation of the budgets. We're going to begin with the EPO, Dr. Sean Nelms for East High School. Just as Dr. Nelms is getting his presentation ready, for those of you who aren't aware, the purpose of this is for the administration to give us an overview of their budget proposal. This is not the occasion where we take in-depth questions and there's no extensive dialogue about the budget. This is actually the first part of a very extensive, exhaustive process, which we will see Commissioner Powell do a lot of the directing of the conversation. But tonight I'm just the master of ceremonies, and I turn the baton over to you, Dr. Nelms.
Yes. Well, good evening. Tom is hooking up the technology here. So tonight we're going to, I have spoken to the board at length in past meetings about programs and services, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time tonight. And I've also worked closely with Superintendent Loengard around his identified needs for the rest of this school year and entering next school year. And it was important that, you know, we have our fair share in trying to support what's the pending budget deficit. And so this brief report highlights some of our contributions to that cause. But it's important to know that all the initiatives that we spoke about throughout this year in the last 4 years, our anticipated budget reductions will not negatively impact these programs, the things that we've highlighted as success points in our system. We found our savings from the efficiencies around having more students passing courses, which meant less kids being held back or being retained. We also looked at our budget through efficiencies of professional learning. Throughout the last 3 years, we've talked about the more that we become internally dependent upon our professional learning, the less dependent we become on consultants. And so the overall budget reduction for next year is $2.2 million that we're going to take from our budget, which is about 10% of our budget at East. And that's a permanent cut, again, to help support the budget deficit and to do our share in trying to address the critical needs for all of our schools. For this year, every year I try to, through effective and efficient budgeting, return funds to the district at the end of each year. Dating back to 2015-16, we anticipate at the end of this year that we can return $2.5 million to help support initiatives for the 18-19 budget, but to also think about planning for future years. So this is the East budget and our anticipated reductions for next year.
Well, you promised that was going to be brief, and it was brief.
Yes, it was.
All right, Dan, you want to go up next? Thank you, Dr. Nelms. Dan, he set the bar pretty high or low, depending. Best of luck.
But remember, he's only 2%.
That's true. That's true.
We want to thank Sean. We've already factored that money into this year's budget and next year's budget. So most of the discussion Everton is going to do, but I wanted to refocus on our priorities. We're focused on racial equity, providing quality instruction and social emotional support to all students, but particularly our special needs students, that we need to do a whole redesign, and we'll explain more about that in the coming weeks and months. Reduce the structural deficit, implement the action plan from the DE's report, and of course, our fifth and most important is increase the graduation rate. I want to talk for just a moment about the structural deficit. As I looked at the budget for the past 6 years, we always have a balanced budget, but for the past 6 years, we have spent more than we've taken in, so we go to our savings account. And in those 6 years, we've spent almost $80 million out of our savings account. It won't be fixed in 1 year, but this coming year we've made a substantial improvement, and that's with the help of the staff, because it is painful. You'll see it tonight, but you know, these educators don't want to let go of anything. So I want to tell you that every cut is painful, but we had to do it. We have to get to a spot where we spend only what's coming in. And if we don't do it, we could go bankrupt, because we wouldn't have a savings account to dig into to make sure we have a balanced budget. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Everton. I'll interrupt him on these dramatic slides, but go ahead.
All right. Thank you, Dan. So good afternoon, everyone. So we're presenting the 2019-20 proposed projected budget for next year. This is draft budget, and as Dan had mentioned, you know, we had gone through and done a lot of reductions, you know, that are very dear and near to our hearts. So the way we went about it, you know, we've seen this document before when we did our structural budget gap. So we kind of did the budget when we go through each area to kind of categorize stuff. So as we look at our revenue for the upcoming school year, and what we wanted to do is just show the comparison year over year. So we went back to 2013-14 so that we can see the trend as to where we are. But as we look at the 2019-20 projected budget, our budget for that year will be about $925 million. That includes the general fund, all our grants, and our lunch fund. So we're presenting on the total budget. So as we look at our state revenue coming in, you will see that it went up by about $22 million. Just wanted to highlight that of the $22 million that it went up, only $7 million of that was attributable to foundation aid. $14 million of that was the result of a reimbursable aid, which is our building fund. So it's money that we had spent that we get reimbursed for that. So when we went to Albany and we lobbied the state, that was one of our big things. We only got an increase of $7.2 million in our foundation aid. And we were asking for more than that. So I wanted to point that out, because as individuals look at the number, they will think that the number went up by $22 million. But $14 million of that was money that we spent in this year that we are going to get back for next year. So we had to kind of be like the bank to front the money before the state gives us the money. But our foundation aid, which is our main category of aid, only went up by $7.2 million, which is a 1.66% increase year over year.
And you'll notice in the second line, it has not gone up in some 14 years. So back when our budget in 13-14 was 481 from the state, 119 from the city was a good percentage. But today it's 644, and still 119. So at some point, the city needs to contribute even a 1 or 2% increase. And I think Everton said to me today, if we had had a 1% increase 14 years ago,
Right.
what would we?
We would be at 100 and I think it's $139.6 million.
So,
If we had gotten just a 1% increase every year.
okay.
So that's where we are. So one of the things we also wanted to point out, because our budget gap is based up on our general fund, so we wanted to highlight where our general fund is coming out. That's just more depicting that. The general fund. And this just shows graphically where we are. As the state funding increases and all the other funds, if you notice, the purple box, as the superintendent had alluded to, has stayed constant since 2004. Now, as it relates to our expenditures, we went through with each of the department, each of the executive cabinet members went through, we looked at every school, we looked at every department. Everyone had to come up with cuts in their budget. And as a result of that, we had gone through, and this is where we're ending up with our budget. We made sure that our budget is balanced, but we had to take out $40 million because when we showed the board back in December where we were with our budget gap, it was the $40 million. So our expenditures as where we are now does align and balances with our revenue, but it took some work to get to that, and we'll talk about that as we go through a little bit. One of the things I wanted to highlight as well, if you look on the far right-hand side, and this is something that we will start doing, every time we present either the budget or financial update, we're going to try and tie in what is the per pupil cost for each of the line items. Because there are some items that we look at, and it comes out to be maybe $3 per student, while there are other items that will be running $2,000, $3,000 per student. So, you know, it puts things into perspective when we are talking about the per pupil amount. And again, that is just a graphical representation of our expenditure trend as we look at it year over year. You can see how the trend is going. So this graph that we put in the pic from 2008, and the takeaway from this is as our revenue grows, so does our expenditures because of CBAs, because of cost of living, because of CPI. The difference that we're seeing, especially out here, is what we have used from our fund balance to balance the budget. If you remember when we presented our financial report at the end of the year, that was about $16.2 million that we used for the year, for last school year to balance our budget. That's where you're seeing the difference between the $732 million and the $749 million. That's how we close the budget. For this year, we projected to use $20 million to close the budget, and that's where you see the difference between the $759 and the $779. Again, this is only the general fund, because the special aid fund, which is our grant fund, is self-balancing, and our lunch fund is self-balancing, and we don't flow cost or revenue amongst the funds.
And if you look back, it's almost till 2013 when the first time when we really had revenues more than expenditures. And again, it was needed funds, it's for the students and all that, but that's what a structural deficit looks like. And so we have to be on a trend from now on that our expenditures will always be under our revenue.
So for this year, one of the things we talked about last year is not using as much of our fund balance to balance our budget. This year, we have taken down the amount from $20 million for this year, so for next year, we are at $8 million. That's a drastic move, and I remember when I went to City Council and one person didn't vote for our budget, and he asked me, Everton, how are you going to do this? I said, we're going to use $8 million, and that was Mitch Grober. He said, if you can get the district to use $8 million to balance the budget, he said, I'll vote for your budget every year. So I know when we go over to the City Council, that's one of the things I'm going to highlight to him. So then I know we can do it, and we did it. So that's where we are. So some of the assumptions that went into closing the budget gap, we have our foundation aid. Usually we get maybe a 2.3%. This year we only got a 1.66% increase. We're expecting that the governor's budget may see some additional funds coming in, but we cannot bank on that. So you can't put a budget together with any anticipated fund that you're not certain about. And in other state revenue, the city remains, as we talked about, at $119.1 million. And we have seen some shift in different areas like the QSCB, which has to do with our FMP and our bonding. That's where we see those building aids. We have seen uptick in that. Our debt service has gone up to about $85 million because we had just issued some bonds, about $205 million in bond in August. So it's coming time for us to repay those and pay the interest on those. We use consumer price index in our general operating of about 1.5% increase. Charter school, we have a new charter school that's opening up. While one is closing, we still have another one that's opening up. Their tuition is going up. Charter school tuition rate is also going up by about 4%. So when we balance all of that out, I know for this coming year, our charter school tuition is going to be somewhere between about 91 point something, $92 million that we're paying out. Of the amount that the city gives us, the $119 million, $10 million of that is slated for the maintenance of effort, for capital improvement to our buildings. We can't spend that on just regular operations. So technically, when it comes down to it, we only have $109.1 million that we can use in our operation. Our contingency fund, current year we had 0. Next year we are anticipating of just keeping a very minimal amount of $1 million as a contingency. And again, as I said before, $8 million of fund balance. I deliberately put this slide in because I knew I want to share that with the board and also share it with the city. And as Dan alluded to, if you look year over year as to where we're coming from in 2014-15, from 10 to 11 to 15 to 18 to 20, and then now this year we are down to $8 million. And the projection is that as we go forward, depending on how things go, I would like to take that down to 5, then to 3, and then ultimately get to where Superintendent mentioned that we don't have to depend on fund balance.
We just can't, these are cumulative. You have to add them together, and that's where you get 80 million. Nobody gives you money. It's like going to your savings account every single year, and we don't have enough savings to go next year into it 8 million or so forth. So my hope is, except when you see the cuts, that we can even take less out of our fund balance this coming year. But let's see how, and we may get additional revenue and all that, but keep this in mind.
Right.
Okay.
So overall for our general fund, about $776 million in our revenue, the $8 million fund balance take us up to $784 million, and that's where our expenditures reside. So our budget at this point in time is balanced. It wasn't easy, and then we will go through some of the things that we had to do to balance the budget. wanted to talk a little bit about
I'll
our
talk,
FTEs,
okay.
so.
And this is the worst slide in the packet, that in order to balance our budget, we had to reduce 326 positions. Now, we are offering for, the largest, of course, was our teaching staff RTA at 194. We are offering a retirement incentive. Our goal is to try not to lay people off, but through retirements and that, to try to find positions for people. But at this point, we're at 326, which is horrible, but the other reality, it's only about, no, I shouldn't say only, it's 5% of our total staffing. So it's what we needed to do earlier, but now's the time that we have to go about it. We show you which units we've taken positions from, but none of them are really good cuts. But you'll see, we were at 6,500 employees, and even 6,200 is high given our enrollment, and you'll talk about enrollment.
So as we went through and did the cuts, you know, this is our student enrollment and this is our population. And if you notice, the overall enrollment is going down. But as you look at the blue bars, you can see where the amount that is in the district is going down at a faster rate, while charter school continues to climb. And I know this year, the projection for next year is that we're going to have about 6,100 charter school students. And that just, again, depicts the graphical view of where the trend is in our enrollment. So, some of the things that we had gone through and reduced out of the budget. At central office, when we reviewed all the central office positions, operations, we have taken out $7.5 million. And that's a result of taking out staffing and operational efficiencies, contracts. We've gone through, every department has contributed to that. So we have taken that out. And as you go through, you can see each of the area, our core subject areas, as it relates to the school, 35.1 FTEs. So I'm not going to go through each of those. We have them, but you know, these are some cuts that were in the schools, as I said before, are near and dear to our hearts. They are not easy cuts to have been made, but we knew we had to do that. And as a result of the enrollment and the right sizing of everything, this is what we have seen. So some of the things that I just wanted to highlight is it relates to academic intervention. You know, we have reduced that by 15 FTEs. Rochester Early College, we are only going to have our seniors on the MCC campus next year, because right now we have the juniors and the seniors. The plan is to bring the juniors back in-house, because none of those juniors are taking MCC classes, so we're bringing them back in-house and allow our seniors to stay on campus so they can still have the early college experience.
And while you'll see programs being reduced, you know we're 75% people between benefits and that. So our cuts, unfortunately, come out of people, and that's how you get to 326.
We did also go through and working with the deputy superintendents, looked at the alternative programs that we have in our district, and those alternative programs are like the Links, Young Mothers, all those programs that we have, alternative programs, and did some cuts based upon enrollment and redesign. The expanded learning time program, you see a $4.5 million there. That's all general fund. We still have the expanded learning time grant that we still will be utilizing in the schools to do the expanded learning time, but that will significantly affect, you know, the operations of the school as it relates to expanded learning time. You also see some reduction in community school initiatives as a result of our community school grant is no longer going to be operational the way we have it. We have rollover dollars, but it's only going to be mainly for capital improvement. Summer school gaining some efficiency by $2 million, and the rest, coordinator of special ed, the cases, and redesigning
Let me
that.
just say a word about the cases. We have 40 reductions there. It's our hope that we'll be able to bring a number of these administrators back in different capacities, but at the same time we're trying to redesign special ed. This has become a part of the organization that doesn't work. And many of the reductions, some of it is due to enrollment. We've had decreased enrollment, so some of the cuts, although people don't want to do them, it's because the enrollment is down and some of the cuts really had to be made. And I'll be meeting with the cases, and you'll see right under that, associate directors, we use that title, that some of them will fall into the associate directors. And again, we'll look at really reorganizing our schools, maybe with fewer administrators, but a more efficient way of dealing with particularly our kids of special needs.
So that's how we basically close the budget. And these numbers you see here are not all the cuts, but they are the major ones, because you have certain smaller cuts, nickel and dime, but we wanted to highlight the big areas that we believe was important to the board for them to know certain things that are happening and how we close the budget. So moving forward is where the budget gets very exciting. This is where we now go through and we have the board reviewing, and this is our timeline that has been approved by the board. So we have the presentation today, and then April 2nd we are going to have the first public hearing, then the budget deliberation, and we will go through the budget book. Questions will be presented through our chief of staff, and we will get those questions answered and get back to the board in a very expeditious way. So with that, thank you very much for your time and for listening, and thanks to Dan for leading and shepherding the effort, along with all the two deputies, all the school chiefs, all the other chiefs, all the staff, and everyone, to Sean and Carlene and all of their team that has worked with us. And that's one of the things, just to let you know that, East and us, I know for myself, I know for Dan, we've always worked together. There are times when I've worked with Sean on numbers and with Carlene, so we've always worked collaboratively on numbers to see where we are. So I just wanted to let them know I appreciate all the effort to everyone, and thank you all for your time.
Well, on behalf of the board, I want to thank you all for the presentation. There'll be plenty of opportunities for us to comment, as you suggested in the calendar. I know I have lots of questions already just by looking at this, so we look forward to doing that. But we want to thank you for the presentation. I also want to sort of anticipate that my colleagues would also say thank you for the manner in which you presented today. I've seen quite a few of these, and I've unfortunately seen quite a few of these where the conversation began with a budget deficit and how we were going to tackle it. My observation has been this was one of the clearest presentations about how that challenge could be addressed. I also want to say, I would like to say on behalf of my colleagues, that we appreciate the superintendent returning to the table and sharing the podium with folks who put this together. I think that draws a level of confidence that the community can see. And I also think that the interaction, these are the subtle things that I think are meaningful in leadership. The interactions between you two suggest that you are both on the same page and no one is left wondering, okay, well, is he saying something that maybe somebody else might contradict? And I know there will be many heated conversations, and probably have been many, but I want to say, on behalf of the board, we appreciate the presentation today. It will inspire a greater degree of confidence in the challenges that are ahead for us. So thank you very much. All right, I need a motion to go into executive session for the purpose of discussing a particular person. It's been moved by Commissioner Hallmark, seconded by Commissioner LeBron. All those in favor, yes, hold on before we do that. Yes?
I just want to remind my colleagues that on Saturday, the 23rd at 10 a.m., the administration is, I'm sorry. That's not what was printed, but thank you for that, 8:30. The administration wants to talk us through the book so that we become more familiar with it early on, so that we can better target our questions.
Again, thank you very much. And I need a vote on that. All those in favor of going to executive session to discuss a particular person, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposition? For you gladiators, we will be adjourning from downstairs after we have a very lengthy discussion. I suggest you go home to your family and friends, because this is going to be very late. Good night, everybody.
No suggestion that the gladiators